Alrighty, let us get started for today. Okay, so welcome back. Sociology of religion again, another week. Before I get started on the content for today, I just wanted to check in, see if anybody has any questions about the course. I don't know if there's any people who are new to the class. It doesn't look like there's been much movement in and out, but if anybody's new and you have any questions, now would be a good moment to ask anything that, now almost a week after, the course started. You have questions. Good moment, anybody? Okay, all good? Okay, so we're going to keep talking today about our definitions of religion. How are we going to define what religion is through this course, right? Sorry, I'm just going to grab that door. Okay, last time we were talking our three kind of standard categories of definitions that we have in sociology of religion. Sorry, I just beat you to it. So we had our substantive definitions, our functional definitions, and our social constructionists. So we made it through our last time, our functional and our substantive definitions of religion, right? So just like very quick review, because, the weekend does strange things to our brains. Our functional definitions, right, are all about what religion does, right? Its social function, right, that it brings kind of social order, coherence, and defense of group interests, psychological functions, right, stories, symbols, rituals that kind of give order to life, right? It's a set of tools to organize the world. Right, and we had our three definitions that we looked at. I won't read them again. But then, why were these a problem? They're often too broad, right? So we said things like nationalism can often be included in like a functional definition of religion because it shares a lot of those same kind of attributes. Okay, then we move to substantive definitions, right? Basically, substantive definitions are more about what's inside of religion, the content of religion at the end of the day. So basically, they tend to focus on things like these definitions, right? That religion is, a belief in supernatural beings or something that includes gods and spirits, God, the transcendent realm, demons, whatever you want. Those kinds of things. And Herbert Spencer's definition of religion is the recognition that all things are manifestations of a power that transcends our knowledge. Okay. The problem with those definitions, of course, is that they're too exclusive because there are certain forms of things that are definitely religion that don't necessarily have, some of the attributes that you put in, that don't have the same substance, right? They work pretty well for, most religions would fit within that kind of definition, but there are going to be a few that just kind of slip out. And so are those things not religion, or, is the definition here too exclusive, like it leaves too many things out. Okay, so that leaves us kind of with our last kind of classic, sociological types of definitions of religion, right? So this would be what you can call social constructivist kind of religious or views of religion, right? And basically what these say is that more or less religion is, so generally religions are too diverse for a single definition, but instead they sort of look at it as a process, right? By which systems of belief come to be called a religion. It comes out of the social system, it emerges from us, right? And so Marx, right, in his very famous kind of passage on religion, right, where amongst other things he calls religion the opium of the masses or opium of the people, right? He says the foundation of irreligious criticism, and he's getting this from his mentor Ludwig Feuerbach, is that, don't ask me to spell it, it's German. Actually, I think it's like Feuerbach, Feuerbach, if I recall. Anyway, from Feuerbach, Marx gets this kind of idea. Man makes religion, right? So religion is a man-made thing. Religion doesn't make man. So basically, there's nothing pre-existing about religion. It doesn't refer to any greater kind of cosmology or spirituality or something pre-existing or external to human experience. It emerges from human experience, right? That one light just died. Okay. And now it's back. Okay. The university is still falling apart. Everything's good. So religion is indeed the self-consciousness and self-esteem of man who has either not yet won through himself or already lost himself again, right? So basically, it's like people need religion, to give themselves some kind of belief system, some kind of social form that they can live through and understand the world, right? Man is not abstract being squatting outside the world. Man is the world of man, state, society. Anyway, I won't read the whole Marx quote. It's has certain beauty to it, but I know you can read faster than I can read it to you. But basically, the social constructivist view, you can kind of sum it up in, man makes religion, not religion makes man, right? That we kind of form religion out of our own needs, right? And so, like, if you look at someone like Feuerbach or someone like Sigmund Freud, who would also kind of fall into this category, religion emerges more out of the needs of the people who create the religion, right? It is a reflection of us and our insecurities about our place in the world and the universe and, kind of who we are rather than a reference to some kind of external force, right? Which, there is something to recommend this sort of a definition of religion in that it sort of explains why you would get such different religious systems in different parts of the world, right? That if it is emerging out of the social needs and conditions of human beings in a particular place and time, it is going to reflect them. And therefore, in a different place and a different time, you would have, a certain kind of religion emerging in the Middle East in, 1500 BC, and you would have a very different religion emerging, in China around the year 1000 BC. And, and so on, right? Or 3,500 in India, right? You would get sort of the pre-forms of Hinduism, but that's a very different society. And then if you fast forward to, the 19th century, Joseph Smith is going to create a very different religion because it emerges from a different time and social context, right? And so that's sort of what Marx and these social constructionist definitions are saying, right? That, we form religion, and then we are therefore kind of formed by religion as well, right? But it fundamentally emerges from human beings and their needs, not the other way around. Now, Marx has this whole thing, the struggle against religion is therefore indirectly a struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. Anyway, he has this thing, obviously, against religion, right? He thinks that principally, and especially in the European context, that religion has been used, he calls it the opium of the people, that basically, it helps people sort of get by in life by thinking there's going to be something wonderful at the end, right, after you die. So you can live in sort of deprivation, you can live in a world where you don't have much, where you're poor, where you're oppressed, because there's this promise, especially in Christianity, that you're going to, get your reward later on. Okay, so I don't know if that... Okay. It's okay. So problems with the constructionist definition. And again, all of these definitions, they have something to offer, right? But they're just not complete, right? So one of the things that the kind of, conflict theory assumes in sort of its definitions of religion is that religion tends to be structured entirely towards maintaining a certain social order, right? And you see that in the kind of opium of the people language that Marx uses, right? That basically it's meant to keep the oppressed, right? But, and I mean, if it just emerges out of the society that it's already, if it just emerges from a kind of social order and from people's needs, religion shouldn't actually be particularly powerful in terms of social change, right? Because it would reflect the order of the people who created it, right? And therefore it would basically reaffirm the social order, which is more or less the argument that critical theorists make most of the time, right? Or conflict theorists, rather. Conflict, critical theory are kind of interchangeable. That, religion serves the powerful by locking in the economic order. If you're a kind of classical Marxist, if you're, say, someone who's a critical feminist, right, and you're taking a conflict theory view through feminism, right, it locks in the patriarchy. However, we have enough examples, in history of religion also being a force that actually leads to a ton of social change. And how would that work, right? If it's just a reflection of the power structures in society and the society that brings it forward, how would religion then ultimately lead to social change? Is it, I don't know why it bugs me that the light keeps turning off, but it's just in my peripheral vision. Maybe if I turn the lighting up ever so slightly, it will stop bothering me. All right, I got rid of the mood lighting, but we're all good now. Hopefully, stay. Yeah, so basically, if it just emerges from society, it shouldn't have a lot of potentiality to transform that society or to bring about kind of a lot of social change. But we have lots of examples of religiously based social change that actually goes against the social order, and in a lot of cases, contradicts the people who are in power. And especially in the context of say, Anglo-America, things like the civil rights movement, right? So led by Martin Luther King Jr. And basically it had deeply sort of Christian roots, right? A lot of the language that King uses is about things like the Exodus story, right? The Jews or the Hebrews leaving Israel and leaving slavery, right? And using that as a kind of metaphor for African Americans in the United States, right? Coming out of slavery and into freedom. And, a lot of the language of a kind of social justice that comes out of a particular Christian tradition, right? That looks at the world as, there are the oppressed and the lowly, and those are the people that God loves, right? We can talk about that more later. But basically, this shouldn't happen if religion just emerges from the powerful, right? Because it wouldn't serve their interests, right? So, we have a lot of religiously based social change. I could spend the entire rest of this lecture looking at moments in different kinds of settings where a lot of cultural change has been pushed by religion rather than leading to stability. So the kind of constructionist view doesn't always work in that way. And it's a little bit crude, right? It's a little bit unclear then also why certain religious systems kind of reverberate through history, right? If they were formed in one particular social context, say in the 1st century AD, why, would they continue to find kind of relevance? It doesn't necessarily make sense of that all the time. Okay, so constructionists, hopefully that makes sense. Any questions? Yeah, please.
I was just wondering, so with the idea that religion still moves and can be a driving force in social change, couldn't that also be attributed to the fact that religion's not in a bubble, it's different generations experiencing different texts, different views. So is it possible that changes are happening. It just so happens that people draw from these texts. And even if you look at the internet age, we're now exposed to all these point of view, all these things. So we have more diversity, but we're still able to be like, well, this religious text pulls from that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I don't know how, if a constructionist view that in particular that it serves the most powerful in society, right? Because then it would be, well, I don't know, I'll use Elon as an example. Like, Elon is the most powerful person in society, therefore he gets to set the meaning of the text, right? There does seem to be a kind of like bubbly, kind of from the bottom quality, at least to certain religions. Others not as much. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely something, people can reinterpret things at different times. Potentially, is Christianity or Islam today the same as it was, at its founding? Maybe not, right? And that could fit a constructionist vision. It could also kind of go against a constructionist vision in the sense that maybe there's some essence in these kind of religions that keeps bubbling through and sort of disrupting, the powerful. Yeah, please.
So from a constructionist view, would religion be seen as like progressive compared to like the view of like traditions and conservatism?
I would tend to think that in a constructionist view, it's more seen as, because it comes out of a particular social order, it's going to work to conserve that social order, right? Like, if it's just a reflection of who we are right here and now, then it's not going to be very good at disrupting that, right? Because it's just going to be like, it would enshrine things like capitalism, right? If you had a religion forming now, it would be like very capitalist and very enshrining in capitalism, or, and it would be bad at kind of disrupting that, because if it's just a reflection of who you are here and now, then as a society, not you specifically, although you could create your own religion if you feel like it. We'll talk about how to do that. I'll give you a handy how-to guide if you're wondering. But yeah, I mean, that's where I think the constructionist kind of version of it is like, well, how would anything ever change, right? Because it should be a force that just conserves religion, which, by the way, is kind of why Marxists and people in that kind of critical theory and conflict theory mold are very much kind of always wanting to get rid of religion, right? Because they see it as conserving that social order really strongly, and because often they want to break apart the oppressive parts of that social order, and so they want to push away religion because they see it as just emerging straight out of that social context and reflecting it. And they wouldn't see religion necessarily as able to kind of shake up that social order, because it, if it comes out of that society, it shouldn't really be able to change that society. Does that make sense? Or are you good? Did I answer your question? Okay, did I answer your question? Perfect. Any other questions? You should know about me, I am not the biggest fan of Marx or Marxism or conflict theory in general. So I'll maybe give it short shrift, but I try to do it justice by representing its views accurately. Oh, now you're getting ahead of things. All right, we'll talk about MTD later in the course. Like, I'd have to define it for everyone else, but clearly you've done something. You've maybe taken a class with me before, possibly youth. Some religions of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, use oral tradition and reference nature as the transcendent, and they still find relevance. Isn't that contradictory to a constructionist? Potentially yes, and potentially no, right? I could see a constructionist sort of saying, well, this is sort of the lived experience of indigenous people, right? They're very grounded, or they were, until they were disrupted by European colonialism, in kind of nature, right? Because they lived, much, I think, closer to the land, right? They didn't live in industrial cities or anything like that. And so, the religions would be a little bit more grounded in nature. And so they would just emerge out of that context. So I think they could say that, they would see nature as transcendent. And I think you could certainly find, other religions all over the world, in kind of pre-industrial, kind of very agrarian societies that were similar, that had a strong connection to nature and natural forces, to the point of embodying certain natural forces as gods in and of themselves. Think of the Greeks, right, or the Egyptians, who had gods of thunder, gods of death, gods of fertility, and these sorts of things. And so, I would say there's definitely a way for constructionists to read, I think, an indigenous religion as related to the particular social context that existed. And then looking at it and saying, like, okay, that was interrupted by colonialism. And so those religious systems sort of maybe got locked in those moments. Okay. Well, let's move into other definitions, and I think we'll cover that. Because yes, there are definitely personal and impersonal religions. Okay. So I promise we'll get there. Okay, so where do we go from here, right? So we have our three broad categories coming from our three big traditions of sociology, functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism / conflict theory and Weber, that sort of have problems with all of these sorts of definitions, right? And I mean, this really has gotten bad in a lot of cases, right? And a lot of scholars sort of gave up on defining religion because it was so difficult to do, right? Because you couldn't ever get something that was both inclusive enough and exclusive enough without, kind of these flaws, or didn't just write off religion as a sort of hallucination of human beings and not something else. So, a lot of scholars sort of went with the, I can't define religion, but I know it when I see it kind of approach to religion, which is where you get, a Robert Bellah, who's great, and wrote some really good stuff, but defining American nationalism as kind of American civil religion, right? Because it's like, well, it looks like religion, so maybe it is. And Andrew Greeley, I mentioned him before. He was a Jesuit priest and a sociologist and a researcher at University of Chicago, specifically at NORC, the National Opinion Research Center that runs the General Social Survey. And he said that, and this is about 1991, that trying to define religion was hopeless, right? That we'd tried and tried for over a century and basically kind of gotten nowhere. Okay, however, I think one of the best definitions that I've seen, and the one that we're going to kind of play with for probably a class or two here, comes from, Christian Smith, my buddy, who doesn't know me, but I like him. Who wrote a whole book, trying to figure out, a new way to define religion. Okay, and it is this book, Religion, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters. And we're principally going to be concerned with, for the first couple weeks here, the what it is and the how it works from Christian Smith. Okay, so who is Christian Smith? He's a professor at University of Notre Dame, head of the National the National Study of Youth and Religion, a McGrath Fellow in Sociology of Religion, and, probably one of the most respected sociologists of religion alive today. He's done a whole bunch of stuff. His kind of CV in terms of publications and the range of it in sociology of religion is huge. The biggest ones are all on youth and religion, because I think probably 10 books have come out of the National Study of Youth and Religion, including 2 just in the past year that he co-authored. So, lucky guy. When you have lots of grad students, it's also easier to co-author a lot of books because you get to be lead investigator and they get to do all the work. I'm like, can I have some grad students? No, I cannot. The role, he's also talked about the role of evangelical Christianity in the American racial divide in a book called Divided by Faith, about, the kind of split between the black churches and evangelical churches in America, and on American evangelicalism in general, where he wrote a book that I think is hopelessly underappreciated called American Evangelicalism, Embattled and Thriving, from which, I really like, but seems to have been mostly forgotten. I say he's the best living sociologist of religion, and I had to change that last year because I think the other best sociologist of religion died. That's Rodney Stark, who you'll get to know really well because we're going to talk about Rodney a lot. You'll be like sick of it. Also, you'll feel like he's your grandpa. So, by the end of this course. Okay. So, this is Smith's definition of religion, right? Religion is a complex of culturally prescribed practices, based on premises about the existence and nature of superhuman powers. We'll go through all this language. I'm going to, as we go through, right, I break it into red so we can talk about each little piece of this because it's actually a really intricate definition. Okay, so it's based on premises about the existence and nature of superhuman powers, whether personal or impersonal, right? So they can be personal, they can be impersonal, which seek to help practitioners gain access to and communicate or align with these powers in hope of realizing human goods and avoiding things bad. Okay, so this, I think, is the most precise definition of religion that I think is out there, at least from a sociological perspective. I think it includes everything that needs to be included and seems to leave out everything that shouldn't be included. If there are things that kind of sneak in, they're very minimal, and I think it works really well. Okay, so let's break this down. All right, so, superhuman powers. I think this is one of the key ideas that makes this definition work, right? Because it sort of includes a lot of things while excluding, other things, right? Okay, so superhuman power means powers that are believed to be, you don't have to believe they are, but the practitioners of the religion believe them to be able to influence, control aspects of reality that are typically beyond human control, which is why humans turn to them, right? Okay, so there's some kind of power that is superhuman. Now, one of the things that's really important about this might be on another slide, I can't remember, is that these can be either things that are, transcendent, like outside of the world, like the kind of Abrahamic religion, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam's definition of God, right? God exists outside of the physical world. He exists outside of time and space, not bound within the universe. So it can include that, right? So that a God, it can include also anything that is kind of a superhuman power, but that would exist within time and space, right? So a lot of, say, like the Greek religion, the Greek gods existed in the world, right? They were part of space and time. They came after the creation of the world. They were not, they were super powerful, right? They were extremely powerful beings, but they were just a higher order of being than humans, right? They weren't outside of the physical world, right? And you can see this in a lot of, say, animist religions, right? That think of like spirits of nature, or demons or fairies or anything like that are kind of in the world, right? That these things are powerful, but they can be kind of, but they are in the world as well. So it can include both of those things, right? Transcendent powers, non-transcendent powers, right? Things that are located in the world. And it can fit in things like cosmic forces, like karma, right? Karma or something like that would be a superhuman power, right? It is something that, or the fate, right? Or something like that, that is kind of beyond human control, but still, but kind of impersonal, right? So it can be one of those things. Okay. So yeah, sorry, does that make sense? Are we clear? Okay. Okay. So, still on superhuman powers here. Religious communities that believe in these powers basically take their nature as given, right? So they're not human creations, right? Which in a sense would differentiate them from kind of powerful forces, but things that human beings did sort of create, right? So here you would want to separate, a superhuman power, like God or gods or fairy spirits, karma, any of these things, from something, say, like the invisible hand of the market, right? So in a sense, the invisible hand of the market in kind of Adam Smith's formulation, in a sense, is a superhuman power, right? In that it sort of giveth and it taketh away. But it was, the market itself was created by human beings, right? And so it's not kind of outside of human control, and it's not something that kind of was, I guess, pre-existed humans or is beyond human control, right? Even though it is, in a sense, a superhuman power, right? It's one that was created specifically by human beings. Okay, so basically, the superhuman powers that Smith is talking about, see what I mean, where it excludes certain things? Basically, They're not human creations, right? You may need, you don't necessarily have to, but you often need to worship them, feed them, or appease them, but you didn't create them, right? And human beings, no human being ever created, God or fairies or the spirits. Yeah, please.
So even though, for example, like Satanism is still considered like culturally a religion, they don't actually worship Satan, they worship themselves as individuals. So would that still be covered under this definition, even though culturally it's still recognized as a religion?
I'd have to look up. I'm honestly a little unclear on the actual beliefs of Satanists. And so I would have to, let me see if I can think about that and get back to you because I'm like, oh, what do Satanists actually believe again? Because yeah, there's certainly a branch of Satanism that's like, yes, we worship kind of ourselves or the potentiality of the self, the rejection of conventionality. Yeah. And so I'm almost tempted to say that a lot of Satanism is almost like a movement, and one specifically that's in rejection of religion, right? In that it's like, well, the only God is us, right? And so it's like, it doesn't, in this sense, it wouldn't fit a definition of religion. And it often lacks kind of some of the other characteristics that we'll see in here. So I might actually exclude Satanism from this kind of definition of religion, but I will think about that, and I will do some reading and be like, what does Satanism believe? Question.
Sorry, to clarify, you're saying the invisible hand, though it is like an external force, since we created it, it doesn't fit into this definition
of religion
as like the Greek gods or anything like that.
Precisely, yeah. Yeah, because it's not, like, we created it. So it's not, we don't believe that it somehow exists apart from us, right? If humans disappeared, the invisible hand of the market disappears, right? If we all die in a nuclear war, a real possibility, suddenly again, then the invisible hand of the market disappears with us because it's only a function of our action, right? Whereas, in a religious system, if we all wipe ourselves out, no Christian would believe that God disappears, right? Or that, the Greeks wouldn't have believed that the Greek gods would disappear either, right? They would have been like, oh, cool, they wiped themselves out. Well, who's going to worship us now? Guess we'll make more, right? So, basically. But yeah, sorry, does that make sense? Good questions. Yeah.
Failing to understand what invisible hand market is?
Oh, the invisible, sorry. I'm assuming everybody has a basic knowledge of basic kind of liberal economics. So in kind of Adam Smith's thinking, like going back to the 18th century, is that the market has this sort of inherent, markets have an inherent logic, right? Where, prices are set by supply and demand. Nobody has to set them, right? It's like the invisible hand of the market, sort of a metaphor, says that market prices will be set by the availability of commodities versus their supply. And that basically, the most innovative kind of products, the ones that are cheapest and best made, will rise, whereas the other ones will fall. And it's controlled not by a specific person, like no one's making a choice to say, iPhones are going to do really well in Canada, but that the market just kind of adjusts itself naturally, right? So it's sort of like an invisible force within kind of market economics. But yeah, mostly just thought of as a metaphor. These are great questions. Any other questions? Are we okay? I know I've gotten through 2 slides. It might take a while. I'm just letting you know. Okay, so yeah. They're superhuman. Okay, so this is an important one. Yeah, so, and I sort of mentioned this, right? They're superhuman rather than supernatural because some religions posit gods, spirits, or demons that are part of the natural order, right? Like I said, they're a different order of being, right? They would have greater power than we do, but they are part of nature, right? So a lot of the Greek gods would be an example of this, the Egyptian gods. A lot of, say, if you look at animist religions as well, they would have this kind of quality of there's nature spirits, right, roaming the world, that do things, but they're in the world, right? They're part of the natural order. Evil spirits that are doing evil things to people, and all of these things sort of exist within nature. They just think it's they're a higher order of nature, but still not beyond nature itself, right? So these would be distinguished from, say, I think what we get from the Abrahamic religions, particularly where, God and angels and demons are all kind of supernatural, right? They exist on, outside of the world, principally in heaven or whatever, but they're not, they're not embedded in the world, right? So superhuman, right? So they're beyond human and they're more powerful than humans, but they can be supernatural, but they don't have to be, right? So superhuman would include supernatural, but it would also include all those things that are part of the natural order that exist in other systems. Okay, still good? All right. Okay, so yeah, here, whether they are personal or impersonal, right? So according to Smith, superhuman forces may have a consciousness, right? Thoughts, desires, intentions, or feelings, or not, right? So again, like if we look at our typical thinking of, say, what the kind of Abrahamic religions have as a god, right? This is a conscious being, right? So that has a mind, that has intentions, that wants things, that is conscious, right? It is a personal force, right? And it is one that you can relate to, right? You can pray to it, especially in, say, evangelical Christian language. You can have a personal relationship with Jesus, right? It's very much kind of personal. However, there are also a bunch of religious systems where where it's not a personal force, right? Where something, say, like karma. Karma is a very impersonal force, right? It doesn't necessarily have a consciousness. It's not necessarily interested in people. It's just a sort of impersonal force out there in the universe. And now, you can seek to kind of, in a sense, manipulate it, work with it, put yourself in a certain alignment with it. But you can't, I suppose you could talk to karma, you can do whatever you want, but it isn't something that you would expect to have like a personal response, because it isn't that kind of a thing, right? It isn't embodied or conscious or thought to have desires, right? Something like karma is more of like just a cosmic force, right? Something that exists but isn't a person, right? Doesn't have a personality, okay? Or the Force from Star Wars, right? Technically that's just a religion that George Lucas made up. But if you think of like the Force in Star Wars, right, it kind of makes sense, right? It doesn't really want things, right? It's just something that human beings and other creatures with tentacles on their heads can manipulate in some way or put themselves in alignment with either good or the dark or light side. But yeah, not a personal force in the sense that it doesn't want things, except balance or something. I don't know. I stopped paying attention at some point to Star Wars, so I don't know anymore. Okay. Yeah, so basically you have your personal and impersonal. And so, yeah, you'll have personal and impersonal kind of religions, right? Religions where the focus is really on worship and, knowledge of that particular thing and its will, right? Think of, again, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as kind of paradigmatic examples of this, right? Where it's like we think we know what the will of God is, and we want, to align ourselves with that, or to know this being's will for our lives and all of these things, right? And we'll make reference to prayer and emotion and the revealed texts of these religions. Or, you can have something like certain forms of Buddhism, right? Where basically you're trying to align yourself, not with gods, but with kind of a cosmic force, karma, so that you can break the cycle of rebirth and these sorts of things, right? There's certain forms of Hinduism that are like this as well. Okay, so sorry, does that make sense? Yeah.
So you could argue that both personal and impersonal have active roles for the participant, like we both have to pray or like meditate. However, for the personal one, there's more of an active agenda of trying to figure out what the conscious being wants from you, while karma's like, find out.
It's more like you're wanting to align yourself with the cosmic forces, right? So like I can never pronounce these because they're really hard, like Theravada Buddhism, right? Or Zen Buddhism, right? The whole idea is like emptying out of yourself, getting rid of your desires to align yourself with the cosmic forces. Because like in the cosmology, right, you are in the cycle of birth and rebirth, right? So depending on how you live your life, you're reborn as something, right? But anytime you're reborn, it's because you had desires and your spirit can't ever kind of just let itself be one with the universe. I'm butchering Buddhist theology, I'm sorry. And then the idea in some forms is like, get rid of all your desires, right? Meditate, meditate, meditate until you detach yourself from worldly desires so that you can align with the forces of karma, and then you'll sort of like cease to be, right? The cycle of suffering will end, you'll stop being reborn, and you kind of see the difference, right? It's not like karma wants something, it's just this cosmic force of like balance or something like that. Yeah, that's a good question. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, fate. That's a good example. Fate could be a kind of cosmic force that you're, beholden to. You might try to like, I guess in some religious systems, the fates are actually beings as well, like in Greek mythology. But yeah, fate, I guess, is a kind of cosmic force. I'm trying to think of where you would try to align yourself with faith or propitiate faith or that one I'm not as sure of. But I think, yeah, like an impersonal force like fate or, that would be a good one. I just can't think of a religion that tries to manipulate faith in some way. Let me think. Can you give other examples? Okay, I will say fate. We'll say I did that. Karma is probably the one that always jumps to my mind, just because of what it is. Some religions have factors of both. I think in most religions, though, one will sort of be dominant over the other one, like especially in personal religions, right? I know here again, I'm thinking of the Abrahamic religions in particular. God would be, almighty, and everything is an outgrowth of him. I guess like in the Greek religion, right? The fates, again, they were kind of personal forces, but yeah, even the gods were subject to fate in some way. So there were personal forces and kind of an impersonal force like fate. But yeah, so there could be, some of it in both. I would tend to think that one will predominate over the other. And yeah, like in Greek religion, the fate, even the gods have fates. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Hinduism, yeah, does have personal gods, yeah, like, although, again, it depends on which one. Oh my God. Okay, now we're into like deep Christian. See, you're gonna make me play the Lutheran satire video on the Holy Spirit. That's where we're gonna go. Okay, yeah, Hinduism definitely is interesting that way, right? Because yeah, karma, it definitely has a theory or a belief in karma and the god and gods, right? A whole pantheon of gods, or sometimes just one god. That's it, where the other gods are an aspect of, I think, Brahma. Anyway, Hinduism is really complex and really sophisticated and really interesting, and we could lose ourselves a whole semester in just talking about Hinduism and its kind of branches and theologies and all that fun stuff. Is the Bible considered a personal religion? The Bible is considered a book. It is sorry, I'm joking. It's the holy book of Christianity, right, which includes the holy books of Judaism. Both Christianity and Judaism would be personal religions, right? And Islam sort of, I'm going to be careful what I say here. It sort of venerates the Bible as kind of authentically the words of God, but subservient to the Quran. So yeah, the Bible is a holy book. It's not a religion, but it's the holy book of a couple of religions. Yeah, please.
I was just wondering, so for aspects like fate, there are some fates where that is like the abstract concept, but if you look at Greek and Roman tradition, they had beings called the fates. So is it possible to have an impersonal concept become personal or vice versa?
I would think almost certainly, right, in certain systems. Now, that said, I'm trying to remember my Greek and Roman mythology and like the role of the fates, and I'd have to go, like, how powerful were they in affecting actual fate, or were they just the kind of guardians? I need to look back. I like go read Ovid again and figure out what the hell the fates actually do. Yeah, see, I'm remembering just the Hercules version from Disney, and I'm like, it's like stuck in my head, and now I'm like, what is the actual thing, but I'm blanking a little bit on the actual like specifics of what they believed about fate. But yeah, I think definitely you would have moments where something might become a personal force, or people might start to worship something like the fates. But yeah, I'm trying to, like, I even think of like Greek mythology, like people would consult the oracle at Delphi, right, to try and control fate in a sense by having foreknowledge of it. They could bring certain events about or change fate. So then, like, Greek mythology again is complicated, but there's definitely, I think that's a more personal religion because you're doing things like burnt offerings to the gods, right? Worshipping and propitiating their rage, and you're all worried like, are they going to destroy Troy if they don't like me and I steal someone's girlfriend, right? Or I guess wife, Helen of Troy. So, but yeah, there might be an impersonal force at the kind of base of it. But yeah, I'm blanking on specific ones. Is the Holy Spirit, when considered the Trinity, to be separate, personal or impersonal? Well, okay, how much Christian theology do you want in this class? So the Holy Spirit in Christian theology is a person, right? It is. So now, as it goes in Christian theology, and please don't try to make me explain it too much because it will break my brain. Basically, God is one being that has three persons, right? So they're unified and yet distinct. So the Father, or God, the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are all sort of separate persons within one being. So the Holy Spirit is definitely something in Christianity that you can pray to. You can pray for the intervention of the Holy Spirit. You can pray for the Holy Spirit to bring certain things about, for it to transform your heart and soul in your life. So it's definitely a personal force. It's not impersonal at all. It's seen as part of God. Is personality based on consciousness or relationship? I mean, I would think it's a consciousness that you can have a relationship with. It would be the sort of way I think I would think of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm going to go with it. Oh my God, I have 4 minutes left. I told you this is going to take a while. Like I said, it's a dense definition. Okay, this one's a little bit, I was going to say it's more straightforward, and then I'm going to think I'm wrong, actually. Okay, religion, right? So it starts out, it's a complex of culturally prescribed practices, right? So it's things that people do, right? So practices are culturally meaningful behaviors that are intentionally repeated over time, right? So if you only do it once, it's not a practice, right? If it's not culturally, okay, let me go through it. Okay, I'm thinking all the ways that this can go, that you can take things out through this definition. All right, so stuff like, visiting and cleaning ancestral graves in Chinese folk religions, right? So, there are particular days in Chinese folk religion where a whole bunch of practices, go to the graves of ancestors, clean them, sometimes bring food and drink, and basically kind of commune with the spirits of the dead. And that's something that's regularly done. It has a particular date that you're supposed to do it. So that is definitely a practice, right? In something like Roman Catholicism, praying the rosary, right, or attending mass would be, a practice. The 5 times daily prayer in Islam would be, a practice, right? Something that's culturally meaningful and prescribed. So meaning, intention, and repetition must be present and active, right? So basically, it has to be meaningful, right? So it can't be something that is, just done and doesn't have any kind of meaning behind it. There has to be a sort of understanding of why you do these things, right? And again, this can include a lot of different practices for a lot of different reasons, but there has to be some kind of cultural meaning imbued in it, right? Intentionality, right? So it can't be something that people just do and don't really understand why, right? It has to be something that has intentionality. We are doing it for a particular reason, because it's prescribed, right? Not just like, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. Every year, on September 11th, I read tweets about the 2001 September 11th attack. I'm not doing that intentionally. I'm just doing it because, my Twitter timeline is flooded with September 11 tweets because I'm a political junkie at heart. It's something that happens every year on a particular date, but because I'm not intentional about it, right, it just sort of happens. It wouldn't count as a kind of practice, right? Just something that happens, right? Okay, and repetition, right? So it has to happen regularly at regular intervals. Now this can be wide in variation, right? It can be daily. It can be many times daily, right? The 5 daily prayer times of Islam, right? That's a lot, like for a religious practice. It's repeated 5 times a day, but it has to be repeated. But it can be like once a year or once every couple of years or even once a decade, right? Or more, right? But it has to be repeated intentionally, and it has to have meaning. Okay, I guess I'm out of time. Am I out of time? I'm out of time. Okay, we'll talk more about practices on Wednesday. I thought I'd get through more slides. I have so many more slides. Okay.